Okay, let's unpack this. Jeff Thompson's Real Grappling throws down a really surprising statistic right out of the gate.
Yeah, that 90% one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A massive 90% of all live combat situations end up in grappling range.
Which is huge when you think about it.
But here's the kicker. Less than 10% of people who train in combat actually spend time preparing for this.
Right. Makes you wonder what's going on, you know?
So we're taking a deep dive into this often overlooked world of grappling. Forget the fancy movie stuff. We're talking about the down and dirty fundamental aspects that Thompson lays out.
What's fascinating here is this immediate disconnect. It really highlights a potential gap in how many people think about self-defense.
Oh, like,
You have this overwhelming likelihood of a fight ending up close, yet the training focus often lies elsewhere.
exactly. And our guide for this deep dive is Jeff Thompson's Real Grappling, a book that first came out in 1994.
So it's been around a while.
Yeah. And this isn't just someone's opinion. Thompson brings some serious weight to the discussion. We're talking about a martial arts writer and teacher who's penned over 20 best-selling books and instructional videos.
Wow.
He was even the self-defense expert for the BBC, advising everyone from police and Royal Marine Commandos to professional bodyguards.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Thompson's insights aren't just theoretical, are they?
Not at all.
His extensive real-world experience, particularly his time as a bouncer, that gives him a very practical lens on what actually works when things get chaotic.
Absolutely. When adrenaline is high, yeah. And check this out. His qualifications in combat are all over the map. He's a certified coach in Sambo Russian wrestling, both Olympic styles of wrestling, jiu-jitsu, British Combat Association, karate, judo, boxing, and Muay Thai.
So basically everything.
Pretty much. The guy's a real melting pot of martial arts understanding. Even legends like Chuck Norris and Richard Norton recognized his expertise, flying him out to the States to teach alongside them.
That really speaks to the breadth of Thompson's understanding, doesn't it?
It does.
He's not just coming from one specific style, but has a deep appreciation for the nuances and effectiveness of various combat disciplines.
So our mission for this deep dive, and you're already listening, so you're on board, is to understand why grappling is so crucial.
Right.
To pull out the key techniques and principles that Thompson emphasizes, and even touch on its historical roots and how it applies to self-defense.
Okay.
Think of this as your shortcut to getting informed on this vital, yet often ignored, side of combat.
This raises a really important question, though. Why does grappling seem to consistently take a back seat? Thompson has some strong opinions on this, and it really ties into his idea of grappling being the ugly duckling of the combat arts.
That's right, the ugly duckling. Thompson argues that grappling often gets overshadowed by the more spectacular kicking arts.
Yeah, the flashy stuff.
You know, those high, flashy kicks that look amazing in movies?
Yeah.
But his point is that the less glamorous, more fundamental techniques of grappling have actually proven to be much more practical in real-world confrontations over time.
What's fascinating about his ugly duckling analogy is that it suggests that sometimes the most effective skills aren't the most visually appealing.
Right, or the easiest to pick up initially.
Yeah. There's a depth and a real-world effectiveness to grappling that might not be immediately obvious.
And Thompson isn't some grappling fanatic who dismisses other styles either.
No, not at all.
He actually calls himself a complete practitioner, pointing out that 2/3 of his own qualifications are in kicking and punching.
So he's got the striking background, too?
Definitely. So he's looking at this from a balanced perspective, having spent 2 decades practicing different fighting arts and a solid 10 years working the doors as a professional bouncer.
That frontline experience.
That really shapes his view on what truly works when push comes to shove.
This really highlights the value of cross-training and, crucially, real-world application. Thompson isn't just relying on theory learned in a controlled environment. He's seen these principles play out in unpredictable, high-stakes situations.
Now, he brings up a critical difference when you're in grappling range.
Sure.
Once you're in that close clinch, escape isn't really an option until the fight ends, one way or another.
Right, unlike striking.
Exactly. Unlike striking, where you can move in and out of range, in grappling, you're essentially locked in by your opponent's grip.
Yeah.
That makes understanding how to operate effectively in that close range absolutely essential.
This feeling of being locked in really underscores why being prepared for grappling is so important.
Totally.
If you find yourself in that close range without the necessary skills, you're at a significant disadvantage, with your opponent potentially controlling the entire situation.
Okay, so grappling might be the unsung hero of combat. But where did it all begin?
The history bit.
Yeah, Thompson includes a chapter on the history of grappling with a contribution from Dave Turton, who holds a sixth dan in Goshinkawa Yawara. Let's take a quick look back at the origins.
It's important to consider that in the earliest forms of conflict, things would have been very primal. Turton and Thompson suggest that grappling is quite possibly the oldest form of combat known to humanity, likely even predating organized striking arts.
Really? Older than striking?
Possibly. Think about it, early humans dealing with animals or even just interacting physically would have naturally engaged in actions that form the basis of grappling.
Exactly. Think about handling animals, lifting and carrying things.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as comforting a child. These are all close contact actions that could have naturally led to the development of grappling techniques.
Right.
It's really tied to our fundamental human movements.
This connection to such basic human actions is what makes grappling so intuitive at a fundamental level. Even something as simple as children wrestling playfully can be seen as an early form of grappling, a precursor to more formalized techniques.
And unlike many striking arts that focus primarily on inflicting damage, Thompson points out that grappling has this dual purpose: control and destruction.
Oh, okay. That's a key distinction.
It's not just about hurting someone. It's also about the ability to subdue and manipulate an opponent.
That duality is absolutely crucial. While striking often aims for immediate incapacitation through inflicting damage,
Right.
grappling offers the option of controlling an opponent, which can be vital in scenarios where simply causing harm isn't the desired outcome.
The history chapter then takes us way back, mentioning wall paintings in Beni Hassan, Egypt, from around 3400 BC.
Wow, 3400 BC.
Amazingly, these depict wrestling holds, grips, and throws that are still recognizable in gyms and dojos today.
That's incredible.
It's incredible to think about that kind of continuity.
That's a really powerful visual reminder of just how long grappling techniques have been around and how universal they are. These aren't just fleeting trends in combat. They're fundamental aspects of how humans have physically interacted in conflict for millennia.
They even talk about bull wrestling in ancient societies, which, yeah, definitely not something you'd see at your local gym.
No kidding.
But it does highlight how grappling with incredibly powerful creatures could have developed useful strength for human-on-human encounters.
Sure, makes sense.
And the need to grapple against armed opponents in early society was also a major driver in its development.
Right, if someone has a weapon.
Exactly. Getting in close to control them becomes even more critical.
In a world where weapons were more commonplace, the ability to close the distance and control or even disarm an opponent through grappling would have been an absolutely vital survival skill.
Yeah.
You couldn't always rely on having your own weapon ready.
Moving forward a bit, ancient Greece and Rome were huge on wrestling.
Oh yeah, the Olympics.
They even mentioned Milo of Creighton, a wrestling champion who came up with what's considered the first recorded method of progressive resistance training, carrying a bull calf every day as it grew.
Whoa. Talk about dedication to building strength.
Seriously.
That anecdote about Milo of Creighton really brings home the idea that grappling prowess was often directly linked to immense physical strength developed through very practical, real-world activities. It wasn't just about technique. Physical conditioning was clearly a major factor.
And get this, some historians even believe that Greek wrestling might have influenced combat systems in India and possibly parts of Asia through Alexander the Great's conquests and the spread of Buddhist monks who traveled extensively.
That's a pretty fascinating potential connection across culture.
Isn't it?
This potential cross-cultural influence is really interesting and suggests a deeper interconnectedness in the history of combat arts than we might initially realize.
Yeah.
Ideas and techniques likely traveled along trade routes and through cultural exchange.
The Romans also had their grappling methods, and apparently Emperor Commodus himself supposedly won over 500 wrestling bouts.
Wow. Though, didn't he? Wasn't he the guy from Gladiator?
Yeah. A bit ironically, he eventually met his end by being strangled by a professional wrestler.
Oh, the irony. You can't make this stuff up.
Right.
That's a stark reminder that even those in positions of ultimate power weren't immune to the effectiveness of grappling. And the way Commodus died certainly underscores just how lethal certain grappling techniques can be.
The Roman invasion of Britain also brought together different unarmed combat systems. And it turns out that wrestling has been a part of practically every culture around the world.
Which makes sense if it's so fundamental.
Thompson suggests this is because basic grappling actions, like pulling, holding, lifting, and carrying, are just more natural to us as humans than striking. Think about how often we use those actions in everyday life.
This innate quality of grappling movements is a really key point. It's so deeply tied to our fundamental physicality as human beings,
Yeah.
making it a very accessible and universal form of combat at its core.
He even points out how toddlers, before they really learn to punch or kick effectively, will grab and push way more.
Huh. Yeah, that's true.
It's almost an inborn form of combat for us.
Uh,
And our opposable thumbs.
Crucial.
Apparently, they're a major physical advantage that greatly aids gripping and manipulation, which are so crucial in grappling.
The human hand, with its incredible dexterity and grip strength, is indeed a remarkable tool, and grappling leverages these natural capabilities to a significant degree. That ability to firmly grasp and manipulate is a huge advantage.
Diving into British history specifically, the first real mention of wrestling is in the ancient Book of Leinster, talking about very rough wrestling at the Tailton Games.
Games.
Yeah, which started way back in 1829 BC.
Whoa, that's ancient history.
Seriously. Even the Greco-Roman wrestling brought by the Romans was considered tame compared to some of the Anglo-Saxon methods.
Sounds like things could get pretty intense back then.
Yeah, really rough. Grappling and wrestling pop up throughout British historical texts all the way to the present day. Cornish wrestlers even managed to defeat a French team in 1564. And wrestling was a staple event at country fairs and local games for centuries.
Oh, right, like local festivals.
Exactly. It was a real part of the social fabric.
These kinds of events really underscore the social and competitive aspects of wrestling throughout history. It wasn't just about combat. It was often a celebrated display of strength and skill within communities.
Now, things started to shift a bit with the rise of prize fighting and pugilism in the late 18th century.
Boxing emerges.
Right. But Thompson notes that even early boxing champions were often skilled in both hitting and grappling.
Interesting. So it wasn't purely striking back then.
Not necessarily. While first blood bets might have favored striking, the actual bouts were often won by the better grappler who could control the fight.
This transition period really shows how different aspects of combat have ebbed and flowed in popularity.
Yeah.
But the fundamental effectiveness of grappling consistently shone through, even as striking became more formalized as a sport.
Turning our attention to Asia, wrestling in Japan has equally ancient roots.
Okay.
With the first recorded champion, Sukune, dating all the way back to 23 BC.
Wow. Also ancient.
By the 17th century, it had branched into sumo, which became more of a sport, and the various combat systems known collectively as jujitsu.
Jiu-jitsu, right.
Jujitsu was absolutely crucial on battlefields when weapons were lost.
Practical application.
As in close quarters, and especially in armor, throwing and controlling an opponent was often more effective than trying to strike effectively.
That makes sense. Striking armor wouldn't do much.
Exactly.
The development of distinct grappling systems in Japan, like jiu-jitsu, really highlights its importance in various societal contexts.
Yeah.
From formalized sport to practical battlefield application.
Right.
It was a core skill for warriors.
There's even a mention of potential Chinese influence on Japanese grappling during trade fairs.
Okay.
And a Chinese man named Qin Zhenpin is recorded as teaching grappling techniques to samurai.
So more cross-cultural exchange.
Yeah. This interaction even led to the founding of some martial arts systems that specialized in striking as a way to disable or kill quickly.
This cross-pollination of ideas and techniques really demonstrates how martial arts traditions have often evolved through cultural exchange, with different regions and styles influencing one another.
Then comes Jigoro Kano in 1882, who adapted various forms of jiu-jitsu to create Kodokan Judo.
Judo. Okay, now we're getting more familiar.
Right. His initial aim was actually to create a system that encompassed all the best aspects of the different jiu-jitsu styles. By the late Victorian era, Yoki Otani brought jiu-jitsu and judo to Britain, where they became known as excellent methods of grappling-based self-defense.
Right.
For a while, the terms were used almost interchangeably in the West.
Kano's codification of judo was a really pivotal moment. He took a collection of battlefield techniques and transformed them into a more structured and philosophical system,
Right.
which ultimately led to its global spread.
With the international growth of judo came competitions and organizations, like the British Judo Association. Britain and other countries even started beating the Japanese in open contests.
Really?
Yeah, with Anton Giesink's victory at the 1964 Olympics being a major upset and a real turning point.
Giesink's victory was incredibly significant as it marked a shift in the perception of Japanese dominance in judo
Yeah.
and demonstrated the growing skill and potential of practitioners from other parts of the world.
By 1964, judo officially became an Olympic sport,
Right.
which, while hugely boosting its popularity worldwide, also unfortunately shifted its focus more towards jacketed wrestling
Ah, the sporting aspect takes over.
and away from its original, more comprehensive combat roots. Sadly, the art of attaining those vital striking techniques and self-defense applications took a backseat to competitive judo.
This evolution of judo into a primarily sport-focused discipline really illustrates a common trend in martial arts, where the emphasis can gradually shift from all-around combat effectiveness to the specific rules and goals of athletic competition.
Thompson notes that many combat systems, judo, karate, boxing, even fencing, have followed a similar path,
Yeah.
evolving into sports to gain wider appeal and recognition. So this gives us a really fascinating historical backdrop for understanding why grappling might sometimes be underappreciated in a modern context
Yeah.
that's often dominated by the sporting aspects of martial arts.
Okay, let's move from history to the practical stuff. The fundamental building blocks of grappling, according to Thompson.
Okay.
It all starts with your stance.
A solid foundation is absolutely crucial in any physical discipline, and grappling is certainly no exception.
Yeah.
Thompson emphasizes that a good stance is paramount for both launching your own attacks and effectively defending against your opponents.
He talks about the defensive stance, which is essentially a natural balanced stance with your hips lowered a bit for extra stability and a lower center of gravity.
Right, lower center of gravity. Then there's the left or right lead stance, a variation where one leg is forward at about a 45-degree angle and slightly bent.
Okay.
This stance is ideal for being ready to block, counter, or initiate specific techniques.
The key takeaway here is that these stances provide a stable base from which you can generate force and also resist being moved or taken down by your opponent.
Right.
That slight bend in the knees is crucial for maintaining balance and allowing for greater agility and quicker reactions.
And a really crucial point he stresses, especially if you're working on the mat with a partner, is that while your stance might shift as you move between attack and defense, you should always strive to return to that stable, balanced base.
Okay, always return to base.
You should never cross your feet when you're moving around, as that severely compromises your balance.
Oh yeah, big mistake.
And makes you very vulnerable to being tripped or swept. And similarly, you should never let your feet come together and touch, for essentially the same reason that makes you unsteady.
These might seem like small details, but proper footwork and stance are absolutely critical for maintaining control.
Totally.
And preventing your opponent from gaining a significant advantage. Crossing or bringing your feet together makes you too top-heavy and much easier to destabilize.
Thompson recommends practicing these stances with a partner, maybe gripping each other's clothing and moving around.
Just getting the feel for it.
Just to build that ingrained sense of balance and confidence in your footing. Okay, next up, let's talk about grips.
Right, grips. This is where you make contact.
This is where your hands come into play and you start to make contact and establish control.
Gripping is the initial point of contact and control in grappling. It's how you establish leverage over your opponent and begin to set up and execute your techniques, whether you're looking to throw them, control them, or apply submission.
Thompson makes a really practical point here. He says that in a real street scenario, you don't get to be choosy about your grips.
Right. No time for perfect grips.
You have to take whatever hold you can get in the moment and then make the absolute best of it. He also emphasizes that ideally, in a street situation, you're not actively looking to grapple. It's more of a fallback or a reaction to being grabbed.
This very pragmatic approach to gripping in a real-world fight is really important for listeners to understand.
Yeah.
Unlike the more controlled environment of a dojo or a competition, you might not have the luxury of establishing a perfect textbook grip on your opponent's clothing.
However, for training purposes and to understand the principles, he does cover the conventional grips you'll often see in grappling arts.
Okay, like in judo or wrestling.
Exactly. These include gripping opposite lapels of a jacket, grabbing one lapel and the opposite sleeve, gripping the neck area of the jacket and the opposite sleeve.
Right.
Or even gripping both sides of the opponent's neck area. He also notes that many variations of these can be effective.
These conventional grips provide a really good starting point for learning fundamental techniques. They help you understand the basic principles of leverage and control.
That underpin effective grappling. Once you understand these principles, you can start to adapt to less ideal grip situations.
The key, he says, is to maintain a grip that is both firm and yet somewhat relaxed,
Firm but relaxed, okay?
avoiding unnecessary tension that will drain your energy quickly. He also recommends keeping your elbows slightly bent to maintain strength and flexibility in your arms.
Right. Don't lock out your arms.
And for self-defense on the street, he advises keeping your chin tucked down towards your chest as much as possible.
Protection.
And protect against potential headbutts coming your way.
Good tip.
If you can't get a grip on clothing, Thompson says you might have to grab onto limbs, the wrist, elbow, ankle.
Whatever you can get.
Even between the legs, under the armpits, or around the thigh, waist, back, neck, or head, depending on what throw or attack you're aiming for.
The ability to adapt your grip based on the specific situation and the available points of contact on your opponent's body or clothing is absolutely crucial in grappling.
It's not always going to be about perfectly placed handholds on a gi. You need to be able to work with what you have.
He also mentions a more basic method called catch-as-catch-can gripping.
Catch-as-catch-can. Okay.
This is essentially wrapping your arms around the opponent's waist or torso and then locking your hands together.
Like a bear hug.
Kind of, yeah. Gripping your own opposite wrist or even interlacing your fingers to strengthen the hold. It's a very direct and powerful way to control someone's core.
This catch-as-catch-can method is a more primal and less technically refined form of gripping, really emphasizing raw strength and overall control of the opponent's central mass. It can be very effective in chaotic situations where more precise grips aren't feasible.
Now, here's a really important warning about grips. Thompson strongly advises to never intertwine your fingers when you're pulling on someone.
Okay. Why's that?
Because it's surprisingly easy to dislocate your own knuckles if the force is applied awkwardly or suddenly.
Ouch. Right. Good warning.
He then goes on to illustrate a few specific types of grips, such as the grab finger grip, where you grab all 4 fingers of your opponent's left hand with all 4 of your right and lock them tight to pull. But he reiterates the danger of dislocation with this one. There's also the basic wrist grab and the grab back of hand and wrist, where he points out that the top hand needs to squeeze with more force to make the grip really effective.
Okay. So details matter even in the grip.
Totally. Even something as fundamental as how you grab someone has important nuances to consider.
These specific examples really highlight the importance of hand placement and understanding where to apply pressure to establish a secure and effective hold.
Yeah.
It's not just about blindly grabbing, it's about how you make that connection and apply force.
Okay, so we've got a handle on stance and the basics of grips. Now let's get into some actual techniques.
All right. The action.
Thompson starts with what he calls vertical grappling, and this is all about how to attack your opponent without necessarily going to the ground.
Okay. Staying on your feet.
It's about utilizing your grips and stance while you're both still on your feet.
Vertical grappling is all about utilizing your grips and stance to attack your opponent while both of you are still standing. It's about maintaining that vertical advantage if possible and using close quarters techniques effectively.
Exactly. He covers using hand strikes, different kinds of chokes and headlocks, various kicks, knee strikes, headbutts, which he calls butts, bites, and other adamine or striking techniques.
All from the clinch, basically.
All while using the grips you've established for leverage and control. Let's dive into butting or headbutts first.
Headbutts are definitely a controversial technique in some martial arts circles, but they are undeniably effective at very close range. Thompson stresses that the crucial aspect of a headbutt is aiming below the opponent's eye line.
Below the eye line, why?
To minimize the risk of injury to your own forehead and to target more vulnerable areas like the nose or jaw.
Okay. Makes sense. He goes on to describe 5 different types of headbutts. A right-to-left motion, a left-to-right motion, a direct forward thrusting butt, an upward butt, and even a reverse butt.
Wow, 5 types.
All of these are inherently close-range attacks and can be done either with or without actively using your hands to pull the opponent into the strike.
But he recommends pulling them in.
Yeah, he strongly emphasizes using your hands to create that pulling action as it helps to generate significantly more power and disrupt your opponent's balance.
That pulling action is really key because it helps to create a whiplash effect on your opponent, maximizing the impact of the headbutt.
Right.
It's about using your entire body, not just your head, to generate that force.
The power in a headbutt, he explains, really comes from pitching your body forward slightly just before your head connects.
Okay, the body pitch.
Which creates that whip-like motion. Additionally, your body weight continuing to move forward as your head makes contact adds significant momentum to the strike. He gives specific examples for each type of headbutt. And for the forward thrusting butt, he even cautions about the potential danger of hitting teeth.
Ouch. Yeah.
And the resulting injury to yourself if you're not careful.
These detailed descriptions really emphasize the mechanics of each type of headbutt and underscore the importance of proper body mechanics. Not only to maximize the effectiveness of the strike, but also to minimize the risk of injury to yourself in the process.
Moving on to a technique that's perhaps even less conventional and definitely less refined, biting.
Biting. Okay, yeah, that's gritty.
Thompson openly acknowledges that it's a barbaric and unsavory tactic.
Yeah.
But he makes a strong argument for its extreme effectiveness.
Right.
Particularly in genuinely life-threatening street scenarios where all other options may have failed.
Biting is often seen as a major taboo in many martial arts, but in a truly desperate self-defense situation, the sheer pain and shock it can inflict can be a very powerful deterrent. Thompson takes a very pragmatic, survival-focused approach to its use as a last resort.
He states quite bluntly that a bitten adversary is often a defeated one.
Wow.
And even those who don't immediately submit will certainly remember it. He doesn't go into elaborate detail on the mechanics of biting. He figures it's a fairly instinctive action.
Right.
But he does recommend targeting protruding parts of the anatomy, like the nose, lips, and ears.
Sensitive spots.
And in absolutely extreme cases, even the attacker's private parts.
The targets he specifically mentions are all highly sensitive areas where a bite can inflict a disproportionate amount of pain and psychological shock,
Yeah.
potentially disrupting an attacker's focus and their will to continue the assault.
If you do resort to biting, Thompson advises not to telegraph your intention.
Don't let them see it coming.
Exactly. Get your mouth as close as possible without giving it away, and then bite fiercely and grip down hard. Whether you just hold the bite or actually try to sever tissue will depend on you and the severity of the situation.
Right.
He also suggests using your grip on their clothing to help hold them steady while you're biting.
Okay. Use the grip to control.
He does offer a word of caution regarding attackers who might plead to be released,
Ah, the fake surrender.
as this could be a ruse to renew their attack once you let go. If you do decide to release them, he even suggests biting down hard one last time to give yourself a crucial extra moment to escape.
Wow. That's brutal but practical advice.
Ultimately, he emphasizes that biting should truly be a last resort when every other technique has failed to resolve the situation.
This detailed advice on the practical application of biting in a dire self-defense situation really highlights the need for a completely ruthless and survival-oriented mindset when facing extreme threats.
Yeah.
It's about doing whatever is necessary to protect yourself when your life is in danger.
Next up in vertical grappling are hand strikes delivered from that close grappling range.
Okay. Close range strikes.
Because you're so close to your opponent, you can't easily generate the kind of power you would from a distance.
Right. No wind-up.
So sharpness and accuracy become the priority. Thompson identifies the eyes and the jaw as the primary targets for these close quarters hand strikes.
At such close proximity, quick, sharp strikes directed at highly vulnerable areas like the eyes or jaw can be incredibly effective in immediately disorienting or even temporarily incapacitating an opponent, creating an opportunity for escape or further action.
He explains that these hand strikes can be delivered with either hand, but he suggests using whichever hand is in the best position to strike effectively from your current grip and stance,
Makes sense. Use what's available.
which is often launched from that compact 45-degree stance, with your other hand maintaining a grip high on their collar or shoulder for control.
Okay.
The action itself should be explosive, generated by thrusting your hip sharply behind the movement of your hand.
Hip thrust for power. Got it.
He describes a few specific strikes. The claw strike, aimed at raking the eyes.
Okay.
The focused single finger strike,
Yeah.
also for the eyes. The coupled finger strike, where you stiffen two fingers together like a bird's beak to target a single eye. And the palm heel strike, directed at the curve of the jaw. He also mentions a technique called snatch and attack,
Snatch and attack.
where you violently break free from a sleeve grip to suddenly launch a strike at their eyes, jaw, or throat before they can react.
Ah, creating sudden space for a strike. Clever.
These specific hand strikes, while they might seem simple, are all designed to target very vulnerable areas of the head and utilize efficient body mechanics, like that sharp hip thrust, to maximize their impact even within the confined space of grappling range.
Elbow strikes are a bit trickier to execute effectively from a vertical grappling position.
Yeah, seems tight for elbows.
But Thompson assures us they are certainly not impossible. Utilizing that snatch and attack method we just talked about,
Right.
you can deliver a mawashi empi, which, for anyone unfamiliar, is a roundhouse elbow strike aimed at the opponent's face or jaw, again emphasizing that sharp hip rotation for power.
Okay. Roundhouse elbow.
There's also a technique he calls the elbow drop, which you can do from a tight grip on their lapel. You essentially pull sharply outward on the lapel with one hand as you drive your elbow down into their ribs on the same side, using the lapel to generate extra leverage for the strike.
Ah, using the grip for leverage on the strike.
Nice.
Elbow strikes are incredibly powerful weapons at close range.
Definitely.
And Thompson demonstrates how they can be effectively integrated into a grappling context by using your established grips to both set up the strike and generate additional leverage and force.
Now we move on to chokes and headlocks, which Thompson calls definitive stopping techniques.
Right, fight enders.
That can very quickly render someone unconscious with a surprisingly low level of specific skill required compared to some other techniques.
Really? Low skill factor.
Relatively speaking, yeah. Some chokes utilize the opponent's clothing for leverage, while naked chokes rely purely on your limbs.
Okay.
These can be applied both while standing and when you're on the ground. He also points out that these movements can often flow seamlessly into one another. He then briefly explains the physiological difference between a strangle, which works by cutting off the blood flow to the brain via the carotid arteries in the neck,
Blood choke.
and a choke, which restricts the airway by compressing the windpipe.
Air choke. Right.
He rightly warns that both of these can be fatal if held for too long.
Absolutely crucial warning.
So he emphasizes that the tap system, which is a signal, usually a tap on your opponent or the mat, to indicate that you submit and the technique should be released immediately, is absolutely crucial during practice.
Yeah, gotta practice safe.
He then goes on to describe several specific chokes, including the reverse naked choke, which can be applied from either the rear or the front, the side headlock strangle, the guillotine lift, the less refined but effective claw squeeze around the larynx,
Nasty.
particularly useful if your opponent is against a wall or on the floor, and the scissor choke.
Chokes and headlocks are indeed very powerful techniques that can rapidly end a confrontation by disrupting either consciousness or breathing. Thompson's strong emphasis on the tap system in training really underscores the potential danger of these techniques and the critical need for responsible and controlled practice to avoid serious injury.
Moving our focus lower to knees.
Knees, another powerful close-range tool.
Thompson explains that a knee strike to the groin or testicles is a simple yet devastatingly effective technique.
Yeah, that'll stun most people.
Typically an upward lift of your knee combined with a downward pull on their clothing for stability and to bring them into the strike.
Right, pull them onto the knee.
For targeting the head or face with a knee, you would usually release your lapel grip, quickly grab their head by the hair or ears to control their position,
Control the head.
and then pull their head down as you bring your knee sharply upwards.
Oh, ouch. The forward knee involves a similar principle. You pull your opponent onto your upward and forward thrusting knee using a powerful hip thrust to generate force.
Okay.
And the roundhouse knee is somewhat similar to a roundhouse kick, but you're using your grip to pull your opponent into the path of your knee strike.
Using the grip again?
Aiming for their knee, thigh, or body, again utilizing a strong hip thrust and a drop of your body weight into the strike for maximum impact.
Knee strikes are incredibly versatile and powerful at close range, and Thompson clearly illustrates how your grips can be strategically used not only to control your opponent's position, but also to maximize the force and effectiveness of your knee strikes by pulling them into the blow.
Finally, when it comes to feet in grappling range,
Feet seems kind of limited.
their role is generally quite limited due to the close proximity. However, Thompson mentions the shin kick primarily as a way to weaken a specific area or as a distractor.
A setup.
A set of other techniques. The kingari is a direct front snap kick aimed at the groin.
Classic groin kick.
And the ankle stamp involves using your heel to stomp down sharply onto your opponent's ankle.
Ankle stamp. Ow.
He does offer a word of caution that all of these foot strikes should be practiced with a high degree of control in a training environment to avoid causing unnecessary injury to your training partners.
Yeah, definitely need control there.
So that gives us a really good overview of how to attack and defend without necessarily going to the ground in a grappling situation. Next up in Thompson's breakdown are throws.
Throws. Okay, taking them down. Throws are a classic and often visually impressive aspect of grappling.
Yeah, they look cool.
Offering a way to take an opponent off their feet and transition the fight to the ground, potentially creating an opportunity for further attack or control.
Thompson explains that while a well-executed throw can indeed be spectacular and very effective, they generally require a higher level of skill and practice for beginners to master.
Right. More technical.
Compared to some of the more direct striking techniques we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
He also points out that throws are often much more effective if you can set them up with a preceding strike.
Like a headbutt or something.
Exactly, like a headbutt or a hand strike,
Yeah.
to momentarily disrupt your opponent's balance and focus.
Mm.
He cautions that a single throw attempt can often be neutralized by a skilled opponent, so it's not always a guaranteed fight ender.
Right. They can counter it.
His advice is to really master the fundamental principles of stance, balance breaking, and leverage before trying to incorporate a lot of complex throws into your repertoire.
Fundamentals first. Always.
He also notes that the suitability of certain throws can vary depending on your body type and your opponent's.
Makes sense.
So experimentation in a controlled setting is important to find what works best for you.
The idea that using strikes to set up throws by disrupting your opponent's balance and mental focus is really crucial.
Yeah.
It highlights the interconnectedness of different combat skills and how combining them can be more effective than relying on just one type of technique.
He categorizes throws broadly into foot throws, hip throws, and shoulder throws.
Okay, 3 main types.
Acknowledging that there are many variations within each category. He emphasizes that while flashy, complex throws might look impressive, they are often impractical in the chaos of a real street fight.
Keep it simple, stupid. KISS principle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead, focusing on basic, fundamental throws that you can execute reliably under pressure is generally the best approach. He also strongly advises against attempting sacrifice throws in a live self-defense scenario,
Sacrifice throws? What are those?
as these involve intentionally putting yourself in a vulnerable position on the ground to execute the throw.
Okay. Bad idea on the street.
Yeah. Throws can be performed with or without a direct grip on the opponent's clothing. You can also use grips on their limbs or simply wrap your arms around them if necessary.
Adaptability again.
Thompson then goes on to describe a fairly extensive list of specific throws, like the major outer reaping throw, the hip throw, major inner reaping shoulder throw,
Okay, lots of names.
minor outer reaping ankle throw, sweeping ankle throw, body drop throw, sweeping hip throw, inner thigh throw, the fireman's lift.
Fireman's lift. Really?
Yeah, which surprisingly can even be initiated from your knees. And the leg lift. For each of these, he gives basic instructions focusing on balance breaking, grip, and execution.
This detailed catalog of throws provides a really good introduction to the variety of techniques that exist within grappling.
Mm-hmm.
While it's a lot of information, it's valuable to see the different ways you can manipulate an opponent's balance and use leverage to take them to the ground.
Right.
Even if you ultimately focus on mastering just a few key throws that suit you and are highly practical for self-defense.
He reiterates that while many minor variations of these throws exist, the most basic and fundamental techniques tend to be the most potent and reliable on the street.
Basic is best.
He also points out that novice grapplers, who may not have a strong base or understanding of balance, are often easier to throw using these fundamental techniques.
Good point.
A key point he makes, again, is that using a distraction, like a quick headbutt or a sharp hand strike, can be absolutely crucial for successfully executing a throw against a resisting opponent.
Set it up.
Finally, he emphasizes that your training for throws should progress gradually, starting with no
Exactly.
resistance,
Yep, the mechanics.
then moving to light resistance,
Timing and coordination.
and eventually to full resistance to simulate a real struggle.
Okay, realistic training.
So throws are a powerful tool in the grappling arsenal, but they definitely require dedicated practice and often work best when they're set up effectively. Okay, so what happens if, despite your best efforts to stay on your feet, you do end up on the ground?
The ground game. Chapter 6, groundwork. Groundwork is a really critical aspect of grappling to understand.
Yeah.
But as Thompson very rightly points out, it's also an inherently dangerous place to be in a real fight.
Especially outside.
Especially if your opponent manages to remain standing while you're on the ground?
He divides groundwork into two main categories: grappling on the floor, where both you and your opponent end up down,
Okay, both down.
and fighting from the floor, where you're on the ground but your opponent is still standing.
You down, they're up. Bad situation.
Right. He very strongly advises against ever intentionally initiating an attack from the ground.
Don't pull guard on the street.
Basically, yeah. Calling it a foolhardy and dangerous strategy, even for those with extensive ground fighting experience. His primary message is clear: avoid groundwork whenever and wherever possible.
This is a very pragmatic and survival-focused view of ground fighting that Thompson presents. While some martial arts styles place a significant emphasis on ground techniques, Thompson prioritizes staying on your feet and avoiding the inherent vulnerabilities that come with being on the ground in an unpredictable and potentially dangerous real-world confrontation.
He explains that if both you and your opponent happen to fall to the ground, you have a somewhat better chance of survival and being able to regain a standing position.
Okay, slightly better odds if both fall.
However, if you find yourself down and your attacker is still standing, they have a significant advantage and will likely go in for the kill with strikes or other attacks.
Yeah, kicks and stomps. Nasty.
So if you do end up on the floor, your absolute first priority needs to be establishing a good defensive posture.
Defense first.
He describes lying on your side with your arms and legs, positioned to provide support, and using a raised knee and elbow to create a barrier and protect your vital areas.
Okay, covering up.
He also suggests trying to hook one of your attacker's feet with your own to gain some leverage,
Control the leg.
which you can then use to thrust your other foot into their shin, creating some space. Your ultimate goal in this situation is to get back to your feet as quickly as humanly possible.
Get up, get up.
And you should be prepared to kick at their groin, knees, or shins if they get within range before you manage to stand up.
These defensive postures are specifically designed to protect your most vulnerable areas while simultaneously creating a little bit of space.
Yeah.
And perhaps an opportunity to disrupt your attacker's balance or close the distance enough to regain your footing, which is undoubtedly the safest place to be.
He also talks about adopting a sitting up posture.
Okay. Sitting guard.
Where one leg is bent with the knee raised to protect your groin and body, and one arm and elbow are held up to guard your head and face, ready to block any incoming kicks.
Right. Protecting the head.
Your immediate goal from this position is to parry their attacks and create an opening that allows you to get back onto your feet.
Still trying to stand up.
If standing up proves impossible in the immediate moment, Thompson advises trying to grab onto their arms or legs in an attempt to pull them down to your level.
Bring them down with you. Okay.
While you're on the ground and being attacked, he says to use your legs and arms to take the blows, protecting your major internal organs as much as possible.
Absorb the damage strategically.
And to endure the pain if it means you can either get back up or topple your assailant. Toughness required.
If you both end up on the ground, the advice shifts to fighting back as aggressively as possible, targeting their vital areas with everything you have.
Okay, if both down, go on offense. He stresses being calculated and accurate with your strikes and to conserve your energy. He lists a range of close quarters tactics: bite, pinch, gouge, headbutt, knee, choke, anything and everything that might give you an advantage.
Basically all the nasty stuff again.
Pretty much. He also reiterates that many of the vertical grappling attacks he described earlier can work very well, and sometimes even better, when applied horizontally on the ground.
Okay, techniques transfer.
You should absolutely expect resistance from your opponent and be prepared to fight hard. He emphasizes that even one well-placed choke, eye gouge, or joint lock can be enough to win the fight.
This aggressive defense from the ground is all about disrupting your attacker, preventing them from delivering effective strikes, and creating any possible opportunity to either escape or gain a dominant position.
Right.
It's about refusing to be a passive target and actively fighting for your survival.
Thompson stresses that the ground techniques he describes are really just guidelines you need to change to suit the specific situation.
Adapt to the chaos.
If a technique works in the chaos of a real fight, then you should absolutely use it, regardless of whether it's textbook perfect. The main focus should always be on practical techniques that are effective for the unpredictable nature of a street fight.
Practicality over purity.
He then goes on to describe several specific ground holds: the scarf hold, the front chin-to-chest neck crank, a technique he calls stocks, which involves a sit-out and forward neck crank.
Okay, more specific techniques.
The forward figure 4 hold down, the shoulder hold and neck choke, the arm hug elbow lock, the reverse scarf hold, and the upper four-quarters hold. For each, he provides basic instructions on positioning and control.
These ground holds offer methods for controlling and potentially submitting an opponent if you do find yourself on the ground.
Yeah.
However, it's really important to keep in mind Thompson's earlier strong warning about avoiding groundwork whenever possible.
What's that like?
These techniques are tools to be used if you end up there, not an invitation to take the fight to the ground.
He does briefly mention that effective variations of these ground holds exist, but he also cautions that many other more complex ground techniques are often impractical in uncontrolled street settings.
Right. Too complex leaves you open.
Because they can leave you in very vulnerable postures. His overall advice remains, if you end up on the ground, your priority should always be to get back to a vertical position as quickly as possible.
Get up.
Either to run to safety or to finish the fight on your feet. He also reminds listeners about the very real danger of facing multiple attackers if you get caught up in ground grappling with one opponent.
Oh yeah, big danger. Your buddies stomp you.
Exactly. And just like with practicing throws, he advises that your training for groundwork should also progress from no resistance to light resistance and then eventually to full resistance.
Progressive training again.
So, while groundwork is a dangerous scenario to find yourself in, understanding the fundamental principles and some basic techniques is a necessary part of grappling for self-defense. Okay, moving on to a somewhat shorter chapter.
Finger locks?
Finger locks. Ooh, sound painful. Finger locks are a very specialized subset of joint manipulation techniques that specifically target the smaller and more delicate joints of the fingers.
Thompson makes a distinction between locks, which involve taking a limb or joint beyond its natural range of motion,
Hyperextension, basically.
and levers, which involve applying force against its natural movement.
Okay. Lock versus lever.
He considers finger locks to have a relatively minor role in most street self-defense scenarios, referring to them almost as rainy day techniques.
Rainy day techniques. Huh. Like only if you really need them.
But he also believes that the art of joint manipulation in general shouldn't be completely dismissed. He emphasizes that every joint lock, including finger locks, has to be fought for and secured properly.
Right. Not easy to just grab a finger.
And they can theoretically be applied both while standing and on the ground. While fingers are inherently vulnerable due to their small size and intricate structure,
Yeah, easy to break.
they can also be quite slippery due to sweat or even blood in a real fight.
Practical problem.
However, if you do manage to get a solid grip and apply a finger lock correctly, it's surprisingly easy to break the small bones in the fingers.
The inherent vulnerability of the finger joints does make them potential targets for manipulation, but the practical difficulty of reliably securing and maintaining a precise grip on individual fingers in the chaotic environment of a real fight often limits their overall practicality as a primary self-defense technique.
He goes on to describe a few specific examples of finger locks.
Yeah.
The little finger bend.
Isolating the pinky?
The two finger spread, where you forcefully spread two adjacent fingers apart, which can be done slowly to cause pain, or sharply to potentially cause a break.
Ouch. Finger split?
And the thumb bend, which is typically applied from a position behind the opponent, where you can bend the thumb backwards against its natural movement.
Okay.
Due to the delicate nature of the finger joints and the potential for serious injury, Thompson advises practicing these techniques with very little to no resistance.
Be careful in training.
With full force application, reserved only for genuine, life-threatening situations where you feel it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Don't break your training partner's fingers.
So, finger locks are definitely a niche skill within grappling, with somewhat limited real-world application in most scenarios, but they are still a part of the broader art of joint manipulation and worth being aware of. Now, let's move on to the crucial aspect of putting everything we've discussed so far together. Combinations.
Combinations, okay. Linking it all up. Combinations are where you start to integrate different grappling techniques as well as strategically blend striking and grappling together. This is where the individual skills you've learned start to flow and become a more fluid and dynamic fighting system.
Thompson breaks down combinations into three main categories. Strike-throw combinations.
Strike to set up the throw.
Feint-failed throw-throw combinations.
Take one throw, do another.
And throw-hold down groundwork combinations.
Throw, then control on the ground.
Right. He also points out that these categories can even be intermingled. For example, you might have a strike that leads to a throw, and then you immediately transition into groundwork.
Okay. Chain them together.
He says that as you gain experience and confidence, the transitions between these different types of techniques will start to feel much more natural and fluid.
Practice makes perfect.
He strongly encourages experimentation in your training to discover and create combinations that work best for your own strengths and style,
Find what works for you.
emphasizing that in a real fight, effectiveness is ultimately the only rule that truly matters.
Totally. If it works, it works.
He then provides a fairly extensive list of examples for each category, starting with strike throw combinations, such as a headbutt immediately followed by a major outer reaping throw,
But then reap. Okay.
an ear bite leading into a forward knee thrust and then into a major inner reaping throw, and many other variations.
Wow. Ear bite into a throw combo.
The underlying principle here is that the initial strike is intended to momentarily stun, disorient, or disrupt the opponent's balance,
Create the opening.
creating a window of opportunity for you to execute the throw more easily and effectively. He stresses that the throw should follow immediately after the strike while the opponent is still reacting.
The strike-throw combination is a really classic and effective example of how strategically using a strike to disrupt your opponent's balance, focus, or even their vision can significantly increase your chances of successfully executing a throw
Yeah.
and taking them off their feet. It's a great illustration of how different aspects of combat can work synergistically.
He also discusses what to do if your opponent manages to pull you down to the ground after you've executed a throw,
If the throw doesn't quite finish it.
suggesting immediate follow-ups like a knee or elbow drop while they're still off balance, or transitioning directly into a controlling ground hold like a scarf hold, or even attempting a quick fist choke.
Okay, follow up immediately.
He also touches on the importance of continuing to fight for a dominant hold or a submission if the fight does go to the ground.
Don't stop after the throw.
He strongly recommends practicing free fight grappling in a safe environment, like a matted area, starting in a standing position, and allowing the fight to naturally transition to the ground,
Simulating a real fight flow.
so you can get used to that dynamic flow. He emphasizes the importance of building your overall endurance and stamina, and to never give in easily during these training sessions.
Build that grit.
When you're practicing combinations, he advises starting slowly and deliberately to ensure smooth transitions between techniques,
Slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
gradually increasing the speed and intensity. The ultimate goal is to develop an automatic flow where you can seamlessly link different techniques together without having to consciously think about each step,
Muscle memory.
allowing you to react more instinctively in a real-world situation.
This progression from practicing isolated techniques to flowing combinations under pressure is absolutely essential for developing truly functional grappling skills that can be effectively applied in a dynamic and unpredictable self-defense scenario. It's about making those techniques become second nature.
Then he moves on to feint failed throw combinations.
Okay. Throwing off a failed throw.
He explains that on a training mat, a well-timed feint of one throw can sometimes bait an opponent into a reaction that leaves them vulnerable to a different throw.
Like faking right, going left.
Exactly. If they effectively block an initial forward throw attempt, their reaction might leave them open to a backward reaping throw. However, Thompson feels that feint throws are generally less effective on the street.
Why is that?
Against someone who doesn't have a deep understanding of throwing techniques, they might not react predictably.
Okay. Doesn't work on untrained people as well.
On the other hand, a failed throw attempt definitely needs to be immediately followed up with another technique to prevent you from being left in a vulnerable position.
Right. Don't get stuck after a failed attempt.
He provides examples of throw-throw combinations, such as attempting a major outer reaping throw and then immediately transitioning into a sweeping hip throw if the first attempt is unsuccessful.
Okay. Have a plan B ready.
He cautions that combining throws is a more advanced skill and should really only be used as a backup plan if your initial throw doesn't fully achieve its goal, rather than as a deliberate feint in a street fight. The second throw needs to be executed immediately to capitalize on any momentary opening.
Right. Seize the moment.
His overall advice is that basic, well-executed combinations are generally more effective than trying to string together overly complicated sequences.
The distinction Thompson makes between the effectiveness of feints in a sporting or training context versus the more chaotic reality of a street fight is a really important one.
Yeah.
In a high-stress, unpredictable situation, direct and fundamental techniques that you've drilled thoroughly are often going to be more reliable than complex maneuvers.
Okay, so we've got a good handle on attacking and combining techniques. But what about facing different types of opponents who might have their own preferred fighting styles?
Opponent types. Chapter 9 dives into the strategies for beating the kicker. Dealing effectively with opponents who primarily rely on kicking involves understanding their inherent need for distance,
Right, they need space.
to utilize their legs, and then strategically disrupting their ability to maintain that preferred range.
Thompson states quite plainly that while skilled kickers can certainly be dangerous, he personally views them as potentially the least dangerous type of adversary in a real street fight.
Really? Least dangerous? Why?
Simply because the vast majority, he says 99% of fights end up in that close grappling range, which completely negates the kicker's primary advantage.
Because fights end up close anyway. Makes sense.
To beat a kicker, you first need to recognize their fundamental requirements. They need distance to generate power and a target to aim at.
Distance and target.
Which, for novice kickers, is often the groin or abdomen. Your strategy then needs to focus on manipulating their weaknesses and taking away their strengths.
Take away distance, take away target.
Angling your body in a more compact 45-degree stance can help to minimize the available target area. Crucially, you need to close the distance on them,
Bridge the gap.
which takes away their ability to kick effectively. He then describes several specific close-down strategies that can lead to establishing a controlling grip, moving forward preemptively. Picture them moving forward as they begin to lift their leg to kick, actually catching their kicking leg midair.
Catch the kick. Clack.
Using a sidestep to evade the kick and get closer. Combining a sidestep with a parry of the kick, moving forward quickly as they retract their kick.
Enter on the retraction.
Intentionally absorbing the kick on a protected area of your body, and then immediately grabbing their leg, and finally the rush.
A bum rush.
Simply charging forward aggressively to close the distance quickly, even at the risk of potentially eating a kick. For each of these strategies, he provides specific tips on timing and execution.
These various strategies all share the common goal of negating the kicker's primary weapon, their legs at a distance, by effectively closing the gap.
Right.
And forcing them into a closer grappling-oriented range where their kicking skills become significantly less effective.
He emphasizes that precise timing is absolutely crucial for most of these strategies, with the exception of the rush,
Which is just pure aggression.
which really relies more on speed and sheer aggression. Successfully catching the kicking leg leaves the kicker very vulnerable to being thrown.
Yeah, off balance on one leg.
A well-timed sidestep can often expose their back, making them susceptible to a rear choke.
Ooh, nice. Take the back.
He suggests that often the safest approach is to close in rapidly as they retract their kick after throwing it. Even deliberately absorbing a kick on a well-guarded part of your body and then immediately grabbing their leg before they can fully retract it can be a viable tactic.
Taking a hit to get the grip.
Thompson believes that a grappler often has to be willing to take a few glancing blows in order to close that crucial distance.
Pay the price of entry.
But once they manage to get into grappling range, they rarely lose the encounter against a pure kicker.
This willingness to close the distance, even if it means potentially absorbing a less damaging blow, really highlights the inherent advantage a skilled grappler has once they manage to get into that close quarters combat range against someone who primarily relies on kicking from a distance.
Next, we tackle the strategies for beating the puncher.
Okay. Punchers. Dealing with opponents who primarily rely on punches presents a slightly different challenge compared to kickers.
How so?
While they also need to be within a certain range to be effective, that range is generally closer than for kicking.
Right. Punching range is closer.
Which can make them potentially more dangerous in some respects due to the speed and directness of hand strikes.
Thompson considers skilled punchers to be a potentially more dangerous type of adversary than pure kickers.
Okay. More dangerous than kickers.
Mainly because their effective range is closer, which inherently makes it a bit riskier to close the distance for grappling.
Right. Easier to get hit on the way in.
Against novice punchers, who tend to throw wild, telegraphed swings, he recommends basic evasive maneuvers like ducks and slips.
Slip side to side.
However, against a more skilled puncher, the overall strategy remains similar to dealing with a kicker. You need to break their preferred fighting distance and get into close grappling range.
Still got to close the distance.
But you need to do so with more caution due to the higher likelihood of getting hit in the process.
More careful entry.
He advises to always be edging forward, slowly but surely closing the distance and forcing the puncher to retreat.
Keep them moving backwards.
A novice puncher who is constantly being forced backward often loses their composure and effectiveness. You want to avoid giving them the space they need to generate power in their punches.
Don't let them set their feet.
Keeping your head moving constantly, using bobbing and weaving movements, is also crucial for avoiding their strikes as you close in.
Head movement. Keep it moving.
He then lists several specific defenses and close-down tactics, all typically initiated from a compact 45-degree stance. Ducking under punches to grab their legs or torso.
Duck and grab.
Slipping inside or outside of straight punches and immediately grabbing an arm or their clothing.
Slip and grab.
Using a layback maneuver where you transfer your weight to your back leg to evade a punch and then immediately lunge forward as they retract their arm to grab them.
Lean back, then spring forward.
Taking a step back with your rear leg to avoid a punch, and then lunging forward to grab, using a tight guard with your arms to absorb the force of a punch, and then grabbing them when you're close.
Lock and grab.
Preferably as they're pulling your hand back. And finally, the rush.
The rush again, high risk, high reward.
Simply ignoring the immediate danger and charging in aggressively to grab and pull them into grappling range. Though he does caution that this carries a higher risk of getting hit.
Yeah, might eat one doing that.
He strongly advises practicing these defenses and close-down techniques safely in a dojo or gym setting with a willing partner.
Safe practice is key.
Starting with very low or no resistance and gradually increasing the intensity as you become more comfortable. It's also crucial to practice what you're going to do once you successfully close that gap.
Right. What happens after you get the grip?
And or within grappling range.
The strategies for dealing with punchers also heavily emphasize the importance of closing the distance and getting into that crucial grappling range where their punching power is neutralized. However, they also incorporate defensive movements specifically designed to help you avoid their more direct and potentially damaging hand strikes in the process of closing that gap.
Now we arrive at a particularly fascinating chapter. Beating the street fighter.
Ooh, the street fighter. The street fighter presents a more unpredictable and inherently dangerous challenge because they don't adhere to the established rules or conventions of any particular formal martial art.
Right, no rules.
They're often characterized by their willingness to use any means necessary to win.
Thompson defines a street fighter as someone who is potentially a grappler, a kicker, a puncher, and crucially an all-around dirty fighter.
Dirty fighter, okay.
Who will stop at absolutely nothing and is likely to strike unexpectedly, often using unconventional and brutal tactics.
Sounds nasty.
He actually expresses that he fears a true street fighter more than a skilled grappler because of that inherent unpredictability and their lack of any self-imposed limitations.
Fears them more than a grappler. Wow.
He does suggest that one potential weakness they might have is in the area of fitness.
Conditioning.
As they often rely on natural talent and aggression rather than disciplined endurance training. However, he also cautions that truly good street fighters are actually quite rare.
Okay. Most aren't that good.
Right. The real problem in a confrontation is being able to quickly identify whether you're dealing with a genuinely dangerous street fighter or just a less skilled aggressor.
Hard to tell sometimes.
In a potentially violent situation, hesitation can be absolutely fatal. He even quotes from his own book, Watch My Back, describing the street fighter as someone who uses techniques that have been proven in real-life confrontations.
Battle tested.
Has a natural fighting ability across different ranges, possesses a significant degree of control over their own fear, what he calls duck syndrome.
Controls fear.
Often employs mental disarming tactics, is highly adaptable to the specific situation, and will instinctively fight at their opponent's weakest range.
Smart and adaptable, too. Dangerous combo.
He makes the point that most people who talk tough and act like street fighters are really just talkers.
All talk, no action.
And only a small percentage, around 5%, are the truly dangerous walkers.
Talkers versus walkers, got it.
He even suggests a kind of crude test. Take them to the doorway of violence, the point where a physical confrontation seems imminent, and the walkers will likely step through, while the talkers will often back down.
This psychological element of the street fighter, their ability to control their own fear, to potentially intimidate their opponent, and to exploit any perceived weaknesses, is what makes them a particularly challenging and dangerous adversary to face.
Thompson argues that the greatest asset you can have against a true street fighter is savvy.
Savvy. Like street smarts.
Essentially, yeah. Good common sense and street smarts. You need to be constantly vigilant and watch out for dirty tricks and distractions.
Watch for the setup.
Things like what he calls lineups, where they might be talking calmly to lull you into a false sense of security, feigning weakness to draw you in, subtle foot movements indicating an impending attack. the spreading of their arms to create an opening, or any kind of tactile behavior that might be a prelude to violence.
Reading the pre-attack cues. Crucial.
Vigilance is absolutely key. If you do end up in grappling range with a street fighter, Thompson says they will likely resort to instinctive and brutal tactics like biting, headbutting, and eye gouging.
The dirty tricks come out in the clinch.
And they might have some basic chokeholds they know. What they often lack is a comprehensive understanding of refined grappling technique.
Less technical skill, maybe.
Unless, as he jokingly notes, they've read his book.
Yeah.
However, they make up for this lack of formal training with sheer determination, aggression, and guts.
Pure grit.
You often have to really hurt them significantly to get them to stop.
Hard to stop.
In this kind of encounter, Thompson advises to completely leave your morals and any sense of fair play aside.
No rules apply.
They will likely be a significant liability. You need to expect absolutely anything and be prepared to be just as bad or even worse in order to neutralize the threat.
Meet fire with fire, essentially.
He provides some specific defenses for grappling range against these tactics. If they try to bite, move your head rapidly and consider immediately headbutting them in return.
Bite back with your head.
If they attempt to eye gouge, thrash your head violently, try to bite their fingers, or apply any finger locks,
Show you dirty against dirty tactics.
To defend against headbutts, keep your chin tucked down to protect your face. He points out that if they headbutt you above the eyes, they're likely to hurt themselves significantly as well.
Use your forehead against their face.
Right. Ultimately, Thompson says the key question might come down to whether your own bottle, your will to fight and endure, can outlast their often intense but potentially less sustained stamina.
Battle of wills and endurance.
He also strongly warns to beware of plea bargaining or feigned capitulation.
The faked tap out.
This could be a tactic to get you to release your hold so they can launch a renewed attack. The decision to release a hold is ultimately yours, but you need to be extremely cautious in such situations.
Thompson's advice here really emphasizes the need for a completely ruthless and pragmatic approach when facing a truly dangerous street fighter.
Yeah.
It's about prioritizing your own survival above all else and being prepared to meet their level of aggression and lack of rules with your own unwavering determination.
Okay, shifting gears quite a bit. Chapter 12 explores the often overlooked role of inanimate objects in a grappling-focused self-defense scenario.
Environmental weapons. This chapter delves into how the environment around you can become a significant asset and an extension of your grappling skills when you find yourself in a physical confrontation.
Thompson argues that inanimate objects can be incredibly useful to a grappler, providing extra leverage, acting as makeshift battering rams, or simply creating obstacles.
Using your surroundings.
Smart. While using objects in a fight might seem barbaric to some, Thompson is very direct in saying that all violence is inherently so.
Fair point.
And if your primary goal is survival, then utilizing your surroundings becomes a necessary and logical step.
Right, survival first.
He points out that common everyday scenarios often present opportunities to use objects as a crutch or an advantage, being positioned under a table, in a doorway, near a bus shelter, or even next to a death bin can offer tactical possibilities.
Seeing potential weapons everywhere.
He gives several specific examples. Slamming doors on an opponent's head or back, throwing a door into their edge.
Using doors, okay.
Pushing their head into a wall, throwing their body against a wall, using ledges to slam their head, back, or limbs against, or to throw their entire body against.
Walls and ledges, brutal.
He also suggests that if you're grappling with someone on the ground, heavy movable objects nearby can be pulled onto them.
Dropping stuff on them, yikes.
Even smaller, readily available items can be used as weapons. A broomstick or brush can be used to strike or even apply a makeshift choke.
Broomstick choke. Creative.
And a pen or pencil can be used to probe highly sensitive areas.
Pen as a weapon.
Right.
Thompson stresses that the list of potential defensive weapons in your environment is practically endless. Anything can be used to your advantage. Improvised weapons.
He believes that ignoring this aspect is missing a crucial piece of the overall grappling jigsaw for self-defense. He even mentions that there are some particularly effective uses of inanimate objects that he intentionally doesn't list in detail for legal reasons.
Ooh, leave some to the imagination. Probably for the best.
Implying even more brutal possibilities.
This really highlights the crucial importance of situational awareness and resourcefulness in self-defense. Your immediate environment can be a powerful ally if you train yourself to recognize potential weapons and understand how to integrate them into your grappling-based strategies.
Finally, Thompson covers the essential aspects of training equipment and extracurriculum to supplement your grappling practice.
Okay, how to train.
Regarding equipment, while he emphasizes that a live training partner is always the best,
Nothing beats a live partner.
he notes that punch bags can be useful for practicing horizontal grappling strikes. He specifically recommends an encased heavy bag for practicing vertical grappling techniques like grabbing, pulling, and striking.
Okay, heavy bag work.
He also suggests using a heavy bag, ideally one that's dressed with clothing to simulate grips, for practicing all aspects of vertical grappling and most throws.
Dress up the bag. Good idea.
Even a simple karate or judo belt can be useful by hooking it around a sturdy object at about shoulder height and gripping the ends. You can practice the footwork for various throws by pulling against the resistance.
Using a belt for resistance.
Right.
Clever.
He also describes shadow sparring, where you draw a cross on the floor, stand in opposite squares, and visualize an imaginary opponent,
Shadow grappling.
allowing you to practice your throw and strike footwork and combinations, using the lines on the floor for positioning and spatial awareness.
Visualization.
And of course, he addresses the importance of weight training for developing the necessary strength for grappling,
training.
recommending a proper warm-up and cool-down, focusing on fundamental exercises that target major muscle groups, and using a weight that allows you to perform around 10 comfortable repetitions with good form.
Basic strength principles.
He lists examples like the bench press for chest, military press for shoulders, bent over rowing for back, squats for legs, curls for biceps, and tricep extensions.
The core lifts.
He strongly advises using a training partner or spotter for safety during these exercises.
Consistent and varied training is absolutely crucial for developing well-rounded and effective grappling skills.
Yeah.
And Thompson provides a lot of practical and accessible suggestions for incorporating different types of equipment into your training routine to work on specific aspects of your technique and physical conditioning.
For extracurriculum, Thompson reiterates that good grappling requires a combination of skill gained through practice, adequate stamina, and sufficient strength.
Skill, stamina, strength, the trifecta.
He argues that incorporating extra training outside of formal grappling sessions can significantly improve all of these areas. He specifically recommends running as a fantastic way to build cardiovascular stamina,
Cardio. Gotta have a gas in the tank.
suggesting longer endurance runs as being more beneficial for overall stamina than short sprints, but also noting that adding sprints can provide an extra boost.
Long runs plus sprints. Okay.
He suggests aiming for running about 3 times a week as a good starting point, acknowledging that it might be difficult initially, but becomes progressively easier, more enjoyable, and even therapeutic over time.
Gotta stick with it.
He considers it to be one of the best overall fitness exercises for a grappler. He also tackles the topic of weight training,
Weights again.
clarifying some common misconceptions about it, potentially making you stiff and less agile.
Busting the myth that weights make you slow.
Exactly. He argues that it's actually excellent for developing the overall body strength that's so necessary for effective grappling, particularly for groundwork and controlling an opponent.
Strength is crucial for control.
He emphasizes that the specific focus of your weight training should be personalized to your own needs and goals, while he provides basic exercises.
Right. The ones mentioned before.
He recommends consulting with a qualified fitness instructor for a more serious and tailored training program, and also stresses the importance of proper diet.
Nutrition matters too.
Though he notes that a detailed discussion of nutrition is beyond the scope of the book. Again, he reminds listeners to always warm up properly before any weight training and to focus on exercises that work the major muscle groups, starting with a weight that allows for around 10 comfortable repetitions.
Thompson really emphasizes that physical conditioning, encompassing both cardiovascular endurance and strength training, is absolutely essential for maximizing your grappling abilities and overall effectiveness in a self-defense situation. It allows you to apply your techniques with greater power for a longer duration and to recover more quickly.
Okay, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground in this deep dive into Jeff Thompson's Real Grappling.
We sure have. Lots of detail.
Let's quickly summarize some of the key takeaways. Grappling is a profoundly important and yet often underestimated art.
The ugly duckling.
With the vast majority of real-world fights ending up in that close quarters range, its historical roots are incredibly deep, spanning cultures and focusing on control and survival.
Ancient and universal.
Mastering basic stances and grips is absolutely foundational.
Gotta have the basics down.
Vertical grappling offers a range of immediate attack options, including strikes, chokes, knee strikes, and even biting. all utilizing your grips for leverage.
Attacking while standing.
Throws, while requiring dedicated practice to execute effectively, are greatly enhanced when set up with preceding strikes.
Set up your throws.
Groundwork, while a dangerous place to be if you're caught alone, necessitates understanding basic defensive postures and aggressive counterattacks to regain your feet or control your opponent.
Avoid the ground, but know what to do if you end up there.
Finger locks are a very situational skill with limited broad application.
Rainy day techniques.
Learning to combine different grappling and striking techniques into fluid sequences is a more advanced but essential aspect of developing practical fighting ability.
Put it all together. Combinations.
When facing a kicker, the key is to close the distance and neutralize their range.
Beat the kicker by closing the gap.
Similarly, dealing with a puncher involves closing the gap, but with a greater awareness of incoming hand strikes and utilizing careful defense.
Beat the puncher by closing, but be careful doing it.
True street fighters are unpredictable and demand a high degree of savvy and a willingness to use any means necessary for survival.
Street fighters require street smarts and ruthlessness.
Even everyday inanimate objects in your environment can be turned into tactical advantages.
Use your surroundings.
And finally, consistent and well-rounded training, both in the specific techniques of grappling and in supplementary fitness like running and weight training, is absolutely vital for developing true proficiency.
Train hard, train smart, train consistently. Thompson's overall perspective really underscores the critical need for a holistic approach to combat preparedness.
Holistic.
One that fully acknowledges and integrates the importance of grappling alongside striking arts. It's about being ready to handle the full spectrum of potential conflict.
Right.
From stand-up exchanges to close quarters struggles and even ground engagements.
And Thompson really emphasizes the need to develop a complete personal combat system that incorporates all the effective fighting ranges, kicking, punching, and grappling.
All ranges.
Rather than relying heavily on just one single style or range.
Yeah.
He sees grappling as an absolutely crucial and often missing piece of that metaphoric jigsaw of self-defense.
This idea of a complete and well-rounded skill set really highlights the inherent limitations of specializing in only one area of combat.
Yeah.
True preparedness requires a degree of proficiency across all potential ranges and types of confrontation.
Here's a final, perhaps provocative thought for you to really chew on.
Okay, lay it on us.
Thompson actually advocates for viewing grappling not necessarily as your primary offensive tool in a real street fight,
Oh, not primary.
but more as a critical last resort, a vital backup plan to employ after a strike might have failed to end the encounter, or as a reaction against a sudden blindside grab.
Ah, so it's a backup. Or for surprise attacks.
Particularly when you consider the very real danger of facing multiple attackers.
Right. Don't want to grapple one guy if his friends are there.
This might challenge some listeners' initial perceptions of grappling as a go-to offensive martial art.
Definitely food for thought.
It really forces you to think about the strategic implications and what it truly means to be comprehensively ready for the inherently unpredictable nature of real-world confrontations.
Yeah.
So what does it truly mean to be prepared for the unexpected?
That's a really powerful point that encourages us to think much more critically about the strategic role of grappling in self-defense. Is it always the primary offense you're looking for? Or is it perhaps a more crucial and reliable fallback when other options have failed? Or when you find yourself in a situation where striking isn't the safest or most effective approach? It's a vital question for anyone serious about understanding combat preparedness to consider in their own training and mindset.